Hello everyone, my name is Allison. I am a knitter based in Nebraska, and if you can't tell by this massive pile next to me or the title of this video, today I am talking through everything that I knit in 2022. I personally love videos like this. I love seeing what a person has made over the course of an entire year. I do a lot, almost exclusively knitting for myself, and it's kind of interesting to see how I have progressed over a year of knitting. So how I'm going to structure this is sweaters first, then t-shirty smaller items, then accessories, hats, and scarves. I'm going to go from my most worn to least worn items. So the first thing by quite a wide margin is my oversized seasons cardigan. This is a pattern by Ozetta that I knit this fall, and I have worn it 2 or 3 times a week since casting it off. I wear it all the time. I knit this in Peace Fleece in their undyed shade of white, and I am truly obsessed with this. I'm pretty sure my gauge is spot on with this pattern, which rarely ever happens, but I knit this in a size medium, which really gives me that super oversized, extremely cuddly, grandpa sweater vibes, which is exactly what I was wanting with this pattern. Both the yarn and the pattern are something that I'm absolutely happy to use again. Like I've said, I have worn this I don't even know how many times since finishing it, and it has basically not pilled at all. The only thing that's starting to look a little bit rough around the edges are the very edges of the sleeves, the very edges of the hem of the sleeves, because they rest on things, they get a little bit dirty. I haven't cleaned it since I blocked it. So for a white sweater, it is in fantastic shape. This yarn is quite scratchy as you're knitting with it. There is kind of a lot of vegetable matter in it, which I don't love, but after washing it, it softens up so much, and it has a little bit of mohair in it, so it has a little bit of a halo. It's really, really nice. This totally made me a Peace Fleece fan. I knit this in their worsted weight yarn. They also have a DK weight, which I really, really want to try to use in 2023. It is so nice, so sturdy, and it feels like it's really going to last me my entire lifetime, which is what I want when I'm spending all of this time on knitting something. So I think between the yarn and the pattern itself, I have a really classic cardigan that I'm going to get years and years and years of use out of, and I'm really, really happy about it. This pattern had quite a few new techniques for me. I had the neckline, or the facing for all the buttons that you knit at the same time as the rest of the sweater. Fisherman's rib was actually new to me as well. And the back neckline, I had a lot of trouble with actually when I was first starting it. It took me 3 or 4 times of ripping out that back neckline and redoing it until I understood what the pattern was trying to tell me to do. But after I figured that out, the whole thing was smooth sailing, even with a couple of new techniques. And I really think that doing the button band as you're going is such a huge time saver. If you're already taking the time to knit a sweater back and forth, you might as well get the button band on there instead of picking up those stitches. I will absolutely be returning to this pattern probably next year. I want to knit another version of this oversized seasons cardigan. I will probably size it down and use a different yarn, get a different color, and have 2 lifelong cardigans in my collection. My next most worn sweater is my zipper sweater by Petite Knit. I knit this in Knit Picks Swish DK held double with a lace weight alpaca yarn. I can't remember what it is. If I have it, I will have it linked in my Ravelry pattern page down below. The whole thing of my description is going to have a link to every single one of these, which should have a direct link to the yarn, any pattern notes that I have, all that kind of good stuff. This was the very first sweater that I finished this year. I had knit my husband a version of this sweater last Christmas, and then basically cast his off and knew that I needed to cast one on for myself, not to necessarily wear at the same time, but just to have one, because I tried his on. It's so cozy, it's very warm, and I love the half zip, quarter zip style. I have a whole video on my channel that I will link somewhere that describes the changes that I made from the men's pattern to make the women's version of it. Basically, I didn't want to buy the pattern twice, and I knit this based off of my husband's version. I get so much use out of this sweater, but it did kind of start me on my no low superwash journey because the Knit Picks yarn that I used for this is a superwash yarn, and it just feels so heavy in comparison to all of my like non-superwash yarns. I know how the yarn is spun has a lot to do with it. I know that different types of wool fibers, like different breeds, has a lot to do with it as well. However, there's just something about the feel of this sweater that I don't love as much as my other sweaters that are for the most part knit with non-superwash yarn. That being said, I would absolutely return to this pattern again. I think next time I would want to make a version that's a little bit looser. The intended ease for women is quite a lot. I think it's like positive 10 inches or something like that. And I think I have positive like 3 or 4 in this. It's a little bit more closely fitting. So I think if I were to do another one in the future, besides a different color and a different yarn, I would want to have a little bit more ease just for variety with this kind of shape. I feel like this kind of sweater, with it being a little bit sporty, you know, the zipper feels a little bit sporty. It feels like something that you're going to wear out of doors. I feel like I want to have an oversized option as well as this closer fitting option. Next, I have the sweater I am the most proud of finishing this year, which is my Big Love cardigan. So this whole cardigan is knit in one strand of Plotulopi. That is not what is recommended by the pattern, but it is what I did with it. To make it slightly smaller, it is quite oversized fit again, and I'm trying to get a little bit more variety into my knitting wardrobe. Last year especially, I knit like exclusively quite oversized patterns, and then this year I kind of realized not only do I not really have any cardigans, I don't really have anything that's close fitting. So this is a more close fitting cardigan, and it is easily the most difficult pattern that I have knit so far. This is absolutely the kind of pattern where you have to follow step by step by step. You cannot go off book. I am someone who very much likes to get the gist of a pattern and then just kind of like do my own thing. I understand how to knit a sleeve. Like, it's not that hard. Just decrease, you know, every now and again. This pattern, you very much need to follow the instructions, or at least I did, in order to get all of the shaping done. It is so interesting the way that this is knit out from the back collar, all knit in one piece. There's no seaming involved. There's tons of short rows to make the shape like work and fall over your shoulders correctly. It is a fascinating knit if you are someone who is like really interested in getting a good fit and seeing how that's done. That with the shawl collar was just blowing my mind the whole time that I was working on it. The sweater took me quite a long time to knit, not just because I knit it with like quite a thin yarn, there's a ton of stitches, it's knit back and forth, but I also started it, I think, in March, and then all of a sudden we got into the summer and it was very hot. And if you have ever worked with Plotulopi or Let Lopi, any of the Lopi yarns, it's very scratchy and warm on the skin. It was unpleasant to knit over the summer months. When it started getting really, really hot, I was like, absolutely not. Had to put it down for several months until it got a little bit cooler and it made it a lot more fun to knit again, and I really wanted to be able to wear it this fall. With how lightweight the sweater is, it is super, super warm. I find that unspun yarns tend to feel like really, really nice and warm. They're very cozy. The only reason that this didn't get worn more is because that back shawl collar is really touching your skin unless you're wearing like a turtleneck, and that is just a little bit itchy, which means that I kind of have to wait until turtleneck season to wear it. And I didn't own any turtlenecks until this year because if you haven't followed me for a while, or if you don't know, I recently moved from Louisiana, which is very, very hot, to Nebraska this year, which is much colder. And in Louisiana, there's not a lot of need for heavy sweaters, let alone turtlenecks. This is another one of those sweaters that I feel like I'm just going to have for my entire life. It is just such a classic shape. I really feel like I'm gonna get a lot of wear out of it for years to come, and I've already tried my hand at mending it because my cat got his claw stuck in it, yoinked out, ripped one stitch apart, and basically I just needle felted it back together. It was really easy, slightly stressful at the time because I wasn't expecting to have to learn how to do that. Now I've got a needle felting kit and it's very, very easy to do. And with the non-superwash yarns, you can felt it back together. Now the only reason that my next sweater has not been worn so much is because I only finished it last week. But since then I've worn it basically every other day. It is my self-drafted funnel neck sweater based off of a sweater by The Row, the brand. If you're watching this video, you have probably seen my other video, but I will link it in case you haven't seen it. I basically talk through the entire process of what I did to make this sweater. But yeah, it's pretty safe to say that I'm obsessed with this. It is super, super lightweight. Like the sweater itself, it feels like it weighs nothing. I used like 2.5 plates of Nutidin yarn and I think 4 skeins of Einband by Istex. I don't know, I guess I should just weigh it because it is super, super lightweight. It's extremely comfortable and, oh, hello. You gonna sit on my lap? Okay. I'm so proud of this sweater. I'm proud, it's not so much the sweater itself, it's the fact that I figured out the pattern on my own. I know I am someone who likes to customize a pattern, let's say, and, you know, make the sleeve length a little bit different, add a short row here or there, but this is the first time that I have taken, you know, completely nothing, gone from totally scratch and made the pattern entirely by myself, which was very interesting. And I really enjoyed it. So I'm hopeful to, you know, design my own sweaters again in the future, and I'm going to continue wearing this all the time because it is so lightweight. It's such a classic piece and I'm thrilled to have it. Last up, least worn sweater is my Silverstone sweater by Knititude. This is my least worn sweater for quite a few reasons. First reason is yarn choice. I knit this in Cascade Eco Plus, I believe, held double with mohair. And the pattern is meant to not have a ton of ease. I think mine actually might have 0 ease, and it is a little uncomfortably warm. I've yet to find a day where I felt cold enough to wear it because it's almost too warm to like wear anything underneath, and it's so closely fitting that I feel like I'm just going to sweat a lot in it, especially with the mohair. It's just a little much for me. So that is entirely my fault because this is not the yarn that is recommended with the pattern. However, I tested this pattern, so I was part of the test knitting group, and the yarn that's called for, a lot of people used in the test, and pretty much everyone who used it had an issue with the yarn. Mostly that when they went to sew in the ends, the yarn just like disintegrated. It's like a faux fur kind of yarn, and I guess it just was really, really difficult to work with. So in some ways, I'm glad I didn't use the yarn that it was called for. I'm not a faux fur yarn girl, it's never gonna happen. But the yarn that I used, I'm not like super thrilled with either. I was part of 2 test knits this year. This was the first one, and honestly, it wasn't my favorite. The way that it was structured was all through like Instagram, which is not the best way for me to receive like pattern updates, and there were like quite a few issues with the pattern during the testing period. So obviously the pattern for people to buy, all of those have been solved. But for me as a tester, I just didn't enjoy the process at all, and I haven't worn the sweater. So altogether, not my favorite sweater of the year. So my last sweater I actually don't have with me because my husband is wearing it right now, but it is his Leelanau sweater that I knit for his birthday and Christmas this year. I knit this Leelanau sweater in Cascade 220 in the shade, I believe, Antarctic and Silver Gray, and it is so cute. It fits him really, really well. The only modifications that I made to the pattern, because it's not like specifically sized for men, but there's no shaping to it. So the only change that I had to make was lengthening the body and the sleeves. Otherwise, I just followed all the other instructions for the raglan. This was such an easy pattern to knit. It's knit from the bottom up. It's my first ever bottom up raglan. And honestly, I don't necessarily prefer doing a raglan bottom up. I think it's a lot easier to do raglan increases rather than decreases. However, it does give you the little V's pointing, you know, downwards towards the cast on edge, which makes little hearts. I think it's very, very cute. I'm going to definitely knit one for myself in the future. But the only thing that I don't like about this pattern that I did myself is the yarn choice. I am 0 for 2 on sweaters for my husband with yarn choice. The first one that I knit him last year was a zipper sweater that I knit in Cascade Eco Plus, which pills unbelievably badly. It looks so bad every time he wears it that I have to like shave it basically each time he wears it. And now this one with Cascade 220 is also pilling quite a lot. Not nearly as bad as his sweater from last year, so hopefully this sweater for next year won't pill at all. We'll just continually decrease pilling and I will get better at choosing yarns. So while the pilling is annoying and it's not something that I love about the pattern, it was such a joy to knit. The color work really keeps you wanting to like get to that next row of color work, and it's really, really easy. You don't really need to refer to the pattern until you start getting to like, especially the front neckline, you start knitting it back and forth for the like crew neck. For that section especially, you really do need to pay attention to the pattern, but otherwise from that, it's a very simple raglan structure. The little color work makes it super enjoyable to knit, and I think it looks really cute. I can't wait to knit my own. So those were all of the sweaters that I knit in 2022, and now we are going to get into all of the rest of like the littler garments, mostly t-shirts and some vests. So first thing to discuss are my Cozy Classic Lights. I knit 2 t-shirt versions of this pattern, both in Pearl Soho cattail silk. This pink one is called Rose Madder, and this blue one is Cerulean Velvet. Cerulean Velvet. These t-shirts I wore all the time this summer. I knit this one first. I knit both of them size down from what I would normally wear. So a Jessie Made pattern, I'm pretty typically her size medium. I believe I knit this a small, and then this one a size extra small, because the Pearl Soho cattail silk yarn you can wash in the washing machine and dryer. Like you can wash and dry it, but it really changes the gauge. For me, if you like knit, you know, a regular square, when it went in the wash, it became like a pretty skinny rectangle. So it went out and up. I knit each of these with just 1 skein of yarn. And basically what I learned from the first one is it ended up being a little bit more cropped and a little bit looser than I had intended it to be, because I basically just didn't account for how much the shape of the garment would change after blocking. So for the next one, I both sized down the needles that I used as well as the size. So I'm pretty sure I knit this one as an extra small to try to get just like a little bit more length out of it for using the same amount of yarn, and I was able to achieve that, so I was really, really happy about that. This yarn is so nice for the summer. It is very, very lightweight, and it doesn't feel silky, if that makes any sense. It is a silk yarn. I think it's 100% silk, but it is very, it feels like cotton. It's not very like smooth and slick and that like shiny feeling silk. It doesn't feel like silky satin. It feels very matte, and it looks very matte as well, but it made these super, super wearable. So I basically knit a cap sleeve raglan with just like the tiniest little bit of sleeve. And this pink version was probably one of my most worn knits this year. I wore it all the time this summer. The only reason why the blue one didn't get worn more is because I finished it like right towards the end of summer, and there was less, you know, less time to get wear out of it. Like anything written by Jessie May, it's super size inclusive, and there's instructions for like how to get waist shaping and how to not do waist shaping and different sleeve lengths. And so it's really easy to customize it to exactly what you want it to be. I'm definitely going to be knitting myself another Cozy Classic Light this year. It's just such a classic pattern. I'm looking forward to doing like a long sleeve version that I can wear during the fall, but the short sleeves versions were fantastic for me this summer. Next, I have my Sarah vest by Knit Toronto. And I can't remember what yarn I used for this off the top of my head, but I will put it on the screen somewhere. And I knit this towards the end of summer, beginning of fall. So this pattern is pretty heavily modified. It is meant to have lace work, and it is meant to have positive ease, and mine has neutral to negative ease and waist shaping and no lace. So I have kind of changed the pattern a little bit, but I got so much wear out of this because it's just like that perfect extra little layer when it's a little bit cold, but not cold enough to like really want a whole sweater on. And I really like having this version with basically no ease and the waist shaping to make it quite form-fitting. I want to knit like a quite large, like big bulky vest to wear with like a dress like this, but it is also nice to have a super lightweight version as well. This was also knit bottom up. I've knit more things bottom up this year than I've ever knit before. I'm almost always a top down kind of girl because it makes it a lot easier to try on as you go. But yeah, I really like looking at everything all together. I have knit a ton of stuff bottom up this year. I really like this pattern. It was super clear and well written. The only thing that I would change if I were to do the sweater again is it has you cast off the shoulder stitches as you're basically doing short rows and then sew them together. Instead, what I would just do is short rows instead of casting off, and then do a 3 needle bind off for the shoulders. I just think it looks a little bit nicer. I don't think that my like sweater sewing skills are that good, and it's never as crisp of a line as I'd like. And I feel like I get a better look out of a 3 needle bind off. So next I have the other test knit that I did this year, which is the Garter Glide Tee by James N. Watts. Now this, as a test knit compared to the other test knit, is absolutely how I would prefer to work through a testing program. So basically the pattern was perfect. There was, I think, one small change throughout the whole thing, and it wasn't even to my size. So I didn't have any issues with the pattern itself, and everything was done over email. So the couple of tiny changes to the pattern were just sent via email. It was super easy, and the test just went so smoothly. The only thing that is difficult about this pattern is getting gauge. It's a pretty extreme gauge for the type of yarn. I used Fibra Natura's linen yarn, and I used it in 2 different shades of blue, a lighter blue and a darker blue. And then for the third color, I held the 2 of them together. So each section, it's 2 strands of the yarn. It's just 2 of the darker blue, 2 of the lighter blue, or 1 of each. And this pattern is really interesting because it is knit from side to side, which is not something I've ever done before, but it is actually really easy. So you do have to knit this in parts, like you knit the front piece, then you knit the back piece, sew everything together, and then you knit the front neckline all in around. Honestly, I think the most difficult thing for me in this pattern was pinning out the pieces to get them to be the correct size and shape. I cast on and off, I thought really loosely at the time, but with how much I needed to stretch everything to get it to fit the pattern dimensions, I was really having to pull on everything. So if you are going to be knitting this pattern, I would highly recommend casting on and casting off extremely loosely, like far, far more loose than you would ever think is possible, and then it will turn out just fine. This linen yarn is so like, what's the right word? This linen yarn has so much movement to it. It's really, really nice. The having the garter stitch knit sideways, it kind of reminds me of chainmail. I just think that this pattern is so cool. I love the half and half colors. It just really makes me happy. I have another Jessie made pattern, which is my outline tee. So this pattern I knit with not leftover yarn. I had picked up this yarn to knit my half and half wrap with, which I have not finished this year. I have been working on that for over a year, but I basically decided after 6 months of working on this pattern that I wasn't going to like the mustard color for the shawl. So then I had all of this yarn left over and decided to knit this outline tee. And that yarn choice is kind of why I haven't worn this t-shirt more. So this is knit in Pearl Soho's linen quill yarn in the shade Turmeric. And it feels really, really nice in the hand, but it's a little bit too structured in my opinion for this top. So you can even see just the way that it moves, it doesn't have a lot of ease to it, and because this is a drop shoulder design, I just feel like it looks a little bit funky over the shoulders and upper body. So because of that, I haven't really worn this pattern all that much, but it was so fun to knit. So it's a really basic pattern as you're going and as you're doing it, but then you have this fun drop stitch detail, which is really fun to do, and I think it looks really cool. Jessie also made a raglan version where the outline goes like across your arm and then down the front at an angle, and I think that looks really, really cool. I definitely want to knit that this year, and I do kind of want to give this pattern another shot in a different yarn. Honestly, that Pearl Soho Cattail Silk would probably be a great choice for this yarn. I mean, a great choice for this pattern, but that being said, the pattern itself is great. Just my yarn choice needed a little bit of work. So my last garment is another Jessie May pattern. She is such a great designer, and this is the Framework Bralette. So I made a ton of modifications to this pattern. I made the bottom ribbing super, super long. I knit, which was in the pattern instructions, I knit the long cups for the front, the short cups for the back, but I also omitted the slip stitch detail that is on the front. I just didn't do that on the back. And I think the last thing I changed was knitting the straps all the way over from the front and just attaching them to the back instead of attaching them at the top of the shoulder. This I knit with the idea that I could wear it underneath like a big shirt for the summer, and basically never wore it because it was just too warm. I think if I maybe knit it in a different color, I would wear it a little bit more in the fall with like a big cardigan on top, but it just turned out to be something that didn't get a lot of wear, even though it had a lot of promise this year. I will link to another video where I talk all about this because I knit it in just a couple of days. I think I knit this over the entire 4th of July long weekend, but it is a really great pattern. I just didn't get as much wear out of it as I thought that I would. The last vest that I knit this year was for my dad for his Christmas and birthday present, and it is the office vest. So this pattern I also knit with Cascade 220. He hasn't really worn it yet because I just gave it to him last week, but I'm hoping that it's probably gonna pill just as bad as my husband's sweater. It's knit in the same yarn. However, it was a great pattern. I did make quite a few changes. I basically rewrote the pattern for myself in order to be able to knit it in the round. And I also made the chart for myself because it was just written instructions for the cables, and I am a chart girl. It is much easier for me to glance down, look at a chart, and know what to do rather than reading the instructions. Besides knitting it in the round, the only other change that I made to this pattern was adding a lot of length to it because my dad is really, really tall. This was a pattern written for men, but my dad is like 6'4", a lot taller than the average guy. So I had to knit, I think like an extra 4 inches to the body to make it fit him. And it does fit really well. I don't have a picture of him wearing it. I only have a picture that my mom took me. I forgot to take my own picture of the finished object, which is like, what am I doing? But he did try it on and I think it fits fairly well. So I hope he gets a lot of wear out of it this year. That covers all tops. Now we have like hats, scarves, accessories, that kind of thing. Pile in front of me of things that I've already talked about is growing hilariously large, but we're on the last section, which is basically accessories. So I have shawls, hats, and socks. So first things first is the Sophie shawl. So this is a pretty new pattern by Petite Knit. I knit this winter when all of a sudden we had a cold snap that just like completely wrecked me, and I realized that I basically didn't have any actual like cold weather gear and I needed a scarf ASAP. So this is called the Sophie shawl because it has that little bit of a triangle shape, but for me it's basically a scarf. So what I did for this pattern is I marled 2 yarns together. So I held one yarn completely throughout. It's the Cotton Merino Classic from Hobby. And so that is that kind of lilac color that you see throughout the entire shawl. And then I basically went through my like sock yarn scraps and did a fade. So I start with this really, really light color, go to a medium color, then there's kind of a pinky purple, then a more purpley purple, then a much darker purple. So I think between like the motivation of trying to get to the next fade, as well as the gauge, it's like knit on fairly large needles. This came on and off the needles in I think like a week. It was very, very, very quick for me to knit, and I have worn it many times because it has been so stinking cold lately, but I'm really glad to have this. And I want to knit another one, but I do want to change the pattern quite a bit, so that is something to look forward to in the future. Like pretty much every Petite Knit pattern, it is very sparse instructions, but it's completely clear. Like there's no confusion really for me ever with a Petite Knit pattern, and I think that it just turned out really great. So I'm looking forward to probably knitting another one of these this winter and getting even more wear out of it. I am not much of a shawl knitter or wearer, so I only have one other shawl to show you, which is the Fleur shawl by Espace Tricot. This shawl I knit this summer when we were preparing to go on vacation to Vancouver. So I had spent all of this time like researching what our summers in Vancouver like. I was prepared for it to be much colder than our summers here. We had it like around 100 degrees for like months on end. It was very, very warm this summer. And I was reading that it was going to be in like the 60s and 70s and cold at night, and just be prepared to wear layers in Vancouver. So I knit myself this shawl, and then we go to Vancouver and it was a heat wave the entire time we were there in like the 80s and 90s. No one had air conditioning. It was sweltering. So I did not wear this shawl for this trip. I don't even think I brought it with me. Like, it was unnecessary. But this was a very quick and easy shawl to knit up. I believe it is meant to be knit with DK weight yarn, but I just knit it with a fingering weight because for me, it's like, I don't know. For me, shawl sizes doesn't really matter that much. For a sweater, I'm going to try to get a gauge that is as close as possible to what the pattern calls for. For a shawl, you can kind of keep knitting it if you want it to be larger, or just stop when you're done. I think that it just makes it a lot easier to get a shawl to the size that you want it to be, but because I knit it with quite a lightweight yarn, I haven't really gotten a lot of wear out of it this winter either, because I work from home and I can control the temperature of my office. So I actually have a little space heater that I keep in my office with me to keep it warm. So I'm not like cold at the office, you know, and it's quite like a lightweight, I'm cold at the office kind of shawl. So it hasn't gotten a ton of use, but maybe this spring it will get a little bit more use. That covers shawls. I told you I'm not a big shawl knitter. And now we will talk about hats, starting with my Halloween hat. I know I've been mostly talking about everything in order of like most to least worn. This is absolutely my least worn hat, but it gives me so much joy. I just wanted to talk about it first. So this is my Best Beret by James N. Watts. It is a really well written, kind of unique, I think, beret pattern in which the increases and decreases are really scattered about. So you don't have that like spiral that you often see with a lot of beret patterns, which I really, really prefer. So I knit this at quite a dense gauge, more so than the pattern calls for, with Plotulopi again in white that I held double with another yarn, and then the red. And this is actually the same red that I used in my Big Love cardigan. And then after knitting the, bottom in white, top in red, then I felted on a bunch of little spots to turn it into a little mushroom cap. I think that this is just the greatest thing. I need to knit more berets in the future, and I will link to the video where I talk all about this hat pattern on the screen. So my last two hats I have been wearing all the time this winter. I have a Harlow hat worsted by Andrea Mowry, and I have a Musselburgh hat by Isolde Teagues. Teagues. Either way. So first things first, I knit this Harlow hat in Brooklyn Tweed, I believe Shelter yarn, in the red shade is called Long Johns and the purple shade is called Homemade Jam. And I've gotten a ton of wear out of this, and it's my first brioche project. So this is the first time that I ever did brioche. I found it really, really easy. I was so intimidated to learn brioche, and I actually found the 2-color tubular cast on significantly harder than knitting this hat in brioche. The only change that I made to this, I think I made the regular hat part before the decreases a little bit shorter than what the pattern called for, because I didn't want it to be slouchy at all. I have almost exclusively worn this with the purple side out, which is technically the inside of the hat, but I think that the decreases on the top of the cap look just as good from the inside as they do from what is supposed to be the outside of the hat, which makes it completely reversible, which is really, really nice. This knit up so quickly. I know she has a fingering weight version of this pattern, but honestly, I would just knit the worsted version because it knit just like that. My Musselburgh hat took much, much longer to knit because, of course, it is basically like knitting two hats. You start at one end, increase out to make the cap, then knit for absolutely ever before decreasing down and turning the cap back in. So you take one end and basically Let's see if I can do it. You push one end up inside of the other, and then you get a double thick hat. Then this hat you can wear either slouchy with no folds at all, or you can fold up the ears, and then it's 4 layers thick over your ears, which is really, really nice. I knit this in Neighborhood Fiber Company's Organic Studio sock yarn, which is my absolute favorite sock yarn, and knit up so beautifully for this hat. I knit this on size 4 needles, and the reason why I say that is because this pattern is written for any size yarn or needle. So basically you start knitting it with whatever yarn, whatever needles you think is appropriate for your yarn, and then you basically wait until you've gotten enough length to get your gauge, and then from there you have, like, if your gauge is this, then you need to knit this many stitches. It covers a huge range of both sizes and gauges. It is a really, really fantastic pattern. I have knit so many of these hats because I knit them as like my gift knits last year. I knit a whole bunch of them for basically every guy in the family, and now I have my own that I can wear, and I will probably continue knitting at least one of these per year forever because it is such a great hat. And my last category is socks, and they are all pink. So my Christmas cast on last year was the Cornicette socks by Penrose Knits. I started these Christmas last year and then finished them in January, and they were a lot of fun. It's the first time that I have ever done an afterthought heel, which of course, like, it feels really intimidating because you have to cut into your work, but it actually was really easy. The only thing that I don't like about this heel, and this is nothing to do with the pattern, it's just with the shape of the heel, is I think I had too many stitches across the very, very center. It's kind of like a toe of a sock. I need this to be a little bit more narrow for the width of my heel because these little corners get like bunched up every single time that I wear them. Like I said, that is not an issue with the pattern of the sock, it's more so of the shape of the heel that doesn't necessarily work for my foot. Looking at my big pile, I kind of can't believe that there's no other stranded colorwork project. Last year, I knit so many things with colorwork, and I guess just not this year. But this is one of those patterns where, for me at least, I find it really, really easy to pick up on color work, and so I don't really have to refer to the pattern all that much, and I found them to come on and off the needles really, really quickly, and I knit both pairs. This year, I knit so many single socks, and I'm not going to show all of them to you. I kind of can't believe the number of single socks that I knit, but if I get a full pair, it's worth talking about, and this pattern is really great, especially because you can make it as long as you want. It's super customizable, and obviously I went for an all pink theme, but you can change, you could use the same color for the heels and toes. I chose to go with a third contrast color, and I think they turned out really cute. Both of these last sock patterns to talk about are my patterns. The first one is a free one, so if you would like a free sock pattern, you can get that in the description down below, but these are my soft ruffle socks. I basically I got it in my mind that I wanted to figure out how to knit a ruffle sock and make it a little bit easier. Every other ruffle sock pattern that I have seen either used like a provisional cast on, or you cast on a huge number of stitches, knit the ruffle, and then it's just like folded down, and I didn't love that look. So I basically figured out how to sandwich a separately knit ruffle into your knitting, and I wrote this sock pattern. I think these are so silly and fun and hot pink and cute, and I love them. And it got me started on knitting with mohair in the heels and toes of socks, which makes them so sturdy and so soft and warm. So I took that idea and made my cozy little cable socks, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, which of course also have mohair in the heel, toe, and cuff in this version, as well as a cable pattern. The cable pattern is different on both feet to have the cables working opposite directions on your feet, which I think is a cute idea, and I'm not gonna talk on and on and on about these because I do have other videos that describe them specifically, but these are my 2 sock patterns that came out this year. I've been talking for so long that I forgot that I haven't talked about what yarn these are made with. So these again are with Neighborhood Fiber Company. Their organic studio sock yarn is my absolute favorite, and I held that double with, I think, actually their mohair as well. So the Neighborhood Fiber Company mohair as well. And then this sock was knit with Sweet Georgia's mohair silk sock. The shade is Candy Apple, and then I held it double with, I think, Drops Kid Silk mohair in the shade Raspberry. But that is absolutely everything that I knit for myself in 2022. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I have a massive pile of stuff to put away now, and I will see you next time. Bye.